Can I tell you something? People come to yoga to be moved. One of my colleagues likes to say that you could go to the gym, to therapy, and to church, or you could go to yoga. In season 1, episode 16 of this podcast, I talked about designing your lesson plan like choosing a meal. If your sequencing is the meal, your theming is the wine pairings, or the mocktails, or the kombucha or tea to drink alongside your meal. It elevates the experience and gives a warm glow to your students. And if you take some care to pair the beverage with the meal, the whole experience is elevated. It makes everything more fantastic. I'm Sage Roundtree, and this is Yoga Teacher Confidential. Let's talk about theming, what it is, why it matters, and the secrets of how to do it with confidence. You might know that I have co written not one, but now two books on theming: Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses and Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses Volume 2, publishing in March 2025. It has 54 all new themes and an evolved theming template, so it's completely fresh material. Today, I am delighted to welcome my co author, Alexandra DeSiato, to the podcast to chat all things theming. Alexandra is my closest collaborator. She began as my protege, or shall we call it mentee? She needed no protection. She is fierce and more than capable of protecting her own self. Now she and I have written 3 books together: Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses and its Volume 2, and a book called Lifelong Yoga, our book on yoga for healthy aging. That one makes a great gift. She co wrote a book called Whole Mama Yoga, a book that shows readers how to find support from their yoga practice, taking them all the way from preconception through pregnancy to the postpartum period and then on into parenting. Side note, that book has the cutest illustrations you ever did see. In fact, if you look carefully, you might recognize the hand of the very same artist who penned my affirmation cards that appear in the video version of this podcast and on my social media. Those cards are coming soon as a physical, tangible card deck. Okay, that artist is my talented daughter, Vivian, but back to Alexandra. She took over leading the 200-hour yoga teacher training at my studio, Carborough Yoga Company, and she is on the faculty in our 300/500-hour training too. Alexandra is a fantastic teacher across a wide range of styles. She teaches flow, gentle yoga for seniors, pre and postnatal yoga, and also Pilates. Her superpower, though, is in her masterful communication skills. She can connect with students quickly in very genuine ways that elevate their experience in class. I am so happy to have her at my studio. I'm so happy to have her in my life. And I'm so happy to have her as my collaborator and now as my guest on the podcast. Hi, Alexandra. It's so great to have you here.
Hi, Sage. It's wonderful to be here with you to chat about one of my favorite topics.
So, what is theming?
What is theming is a question that sort of begets another question, because what is theming, I think, leads us to also question, why is theming important in the context of a yoga class? So, what is theming? It's bringing an intention to your students beyond just poses and breath work. It's bringing something that is inspiring to students, so that when they leave the practice, they didn't just move their body, but they have something to chew on in their mind and their spirit. And I think that leads us to, why is it important in yoga? And it's important to yoga because yoga is not just another group fitness class. There's a saying that I love. It's, you can go to church, your gym, or your therapist, or you can just go to yoga.
Perfect. I actually mentioned that in the intro already, so I know we are on the same page on so many things. Now, I think since the whole focus of this first season of the podcast is helping teachers build confidence in class, I think talking about philosophy is probably one of the scarier things that leads yoga teachers to a crisis of confidence. Do you agree?
Definitely. It's absolutely intimidating to talk about these ancient philosophical concepts. And I think anytime we're talking about those things, new yoga teachers especially might feel disingenuous. This stuff is really esoteric. unless we can ground it and make it very approachable. And I think the in to it not feeling so intimidating is looking for the ways that that teachers, find themselves inspired by yoga philosophy, find themselves noticing it and getting interested in the parts of it that speak to them and resonate with them. And then, when you find that as a teacher, when you think like, oh, santosha, contentment, that's a theme I think about a lot in relation to myself. That starts to feel then really authentic to talk about to other people if it's something that you've digested and experienced and explored, on your own first. So I do think it can be intimidating, but I think there's a path out of that for sure. And that's something that you and I, try to offer in both of the books that we have written on theming, Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses and Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses Volume 2, which is coming out this spring. I think really our goal there was to make theming this accessible thing, this part of yoga teaching that wasn't so scary.
Yeah, I think it's many teachers aspire, like the reason why they're even yoga teachers is because yoga gave them something more. Like you said, it's something more than just like a group fitness experience. And as a consequence, we want to share that, but it can feel inaccessible or difficult or like something you would need a divinity degree or a philosophy degree to do with authority. So, who are we to speak about these things? We're humans who have something to share.
Right. And the only person who's showing up front and center to your life 24/7 is yourself. So, I'm the one who gets to see when I model great behavior and when I act out of places that are in alignment with yoga philosophy. And I'm also the one who gets to be front and center when I'm in the car pickup line getting my daughter from school and I say something like, drive your car to the person in front of me quietly. Well, maybe not so quietly, but at least in my car so they're not hearing me. But I'm the person who sees both of those things, and that's the case for all of us, right? We see our the moments where we act with within the in alignment with our values, and we see the moments that we make those errors. And I think because of that, that can as a yoga teacher that can kind of mess with your confidence, or it can make you think, oh man, who am I to talk about non-harming if in the car ride or pickup line I said like, drive your car, like maybe I added you idiot in my mind, like who am I then to talk about non-harming or ahimsa? And I think that's the part that we really have to sit with as yoga teachers and flawed human beings. And that is that we're not perfect and we're not gurus, nor are we aspiring to be perfect gurus. I'm a flawed human being. And I christen the car rider line at the slow drivers, and I still can offer inspiration to my yoga students, and I still can say things of value to them, and I still can share my lived experience and offer that in tandem with philosophy so that they've got something that might ease their day a little bit.
And I think our favorite teachers are the ones who show that they are human without being unnecessarily vulnerable or sharing too much information. It's that we see their humanity and their flaws and their fallibility, and we take it as a as a plus, as a pro, and not as something that makes them less than. It makes them fuller. It makes them better avatars for delivering these teachings.
Yeah, I think that's the difference too between maybe how you and I think about what it means to be a yoga teacher, and maybe like this sort of old school way of what it meant to be a yoga teacher. I don't want to talk in an ethereal voice
Right.
and sit on a pedestal and I'm a human being and I'm a mom and I have a temper and I, sometimes sit in meditation and I sometimes eat some ice cream. I'm a human being. And I think that we're all human beings and we're all struggling to be the best version of ourselves. And I think that when we bring that to our students and talk about our moments of struggle or talk about our moments of enlightenment, then we're really serving them a human being to human being, not guru to student, because I don't want to be anybody's guru. Um, but that's such an important point, and it makes me also think about how one of the important parts of being a yoga teacher. And I feel like, when you're thinking about building confidence, especially in the seat of the teacher, this can be something that's really challenging for new teachers. And that is to find the balance between showing up as yourself, showing up and taking up space and leading the class, but then also getting out of the way so that your students can have their own personal experience. And doing that requires this really sweet balance of talking, sharing asana cues and breath cues and theme and intention. It involves being quiet. It involves talking about yourself, maybe in service to your theme, but not talking about yourself to fill space or because you're so important. So it's balancing all of those little pieces. Would you say that that's true?
Yes, it's a fine line, and the only way that you get to balance on any level, physical, mental, spiritual balance of talking and quiet in class is to sometimes wobble and find out like, "Ooh, it didn't feel good to tell that story about my husband," or "Oh, that felt too vague and too broad. It needed to be a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more specific." And those little steps down of your raised leg and tree pose are what eventually actually get you into tree pose with more stability, is to give yourself the grace and permission to have messed up and to figure out, okay, where exactly is the right line here?
I love that analogy of connecting, like playing with theming. How much do I talk about the personal and how do I connect it to the universal? I love the analogy of talking about that in relation to asana, because in some ways they are very similar to your point. The only way you get into tree pose is by figuring out where you want your foot to be, or the only way you eventually achieve strong balance in tree pose is by falling out of balance quite often. Um, but I think, that is very, very true for theming as well. To your point, the only way that you figure out what themes land and how you create a theme that's both personal and universal is to try, and it can feel really awkward sometimes. But I think one of the things that's so important to note is I think this is the case for me. I wonder if it's the case for you. I think it's more nerve wracking to talk about yoga philosophy and my experience with it and how I'm perceiving it and to weave that into a class than it is for me to try some new asana or to try to teach some new sequence that flops.
Yeah, it does. It feels especially vulnerable, even though, yeah, you're not going to bruise your soul. You might bruise, you might bruise your elbow falling out of some fancy arm balance. I just today had my first live call with my test kitchen, who are like
Mm.
my beta group
Mhm.
testers for this mentorship membership that I'm launching, which is itself a substantial part of the 300 and 500 hour yoga teacher training that we lead at my studio. And one thing that came up, we kind of segued into this kind of teacher's lounge chat. And
Mhm.
they were talking about feedback that we get as yoga teachers and realizing, oh, maybe we should literally ask our students, how did that land with you? What do you want more of? And we wound up having a conversation that reprised some of the themes that I've already introduced in this podcast, including we don't really get much feedback as yoga teachers. The
Mhm.
feedback that we
Mhm.
get is the students keep coming. So
Right,
if your
or not.
students return, yeah, if you can
Yeah.
retain your students, that is extremely positive feedback. And if you
Mhm.
can't retain your students, the converse is, though, that isn't necessarily negative feedback. It doesn't
Mm.
mean that you need to change up your teaching. It might just be like it was actually too hard for them, even though they looked like they were bored and it was too easy, or they were
Mhm.
in from out of town and you never received that little piece of information and they were never going to
Mhm.
come back. There are all
Mhm.
these reasons why students don't return, but the reason why they do return is because they liked something about what you had to offer them the first
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
And so we were talking about like when we could collect that feedback. And then I said something that I know I've also covered in this podcast, which is like the end of class is not the best time, because if you did your job right, your students are kind of in this inner world and almost
Mhm.
nonverbal, depending on the class,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
really the time to ask them, what are you here for, is when they get there. And
Mhm.
literally say, like, oh, it's so great to see you again. What brought you back? Is
Yeah.
there something that you were looking forward to? And I also feel like that's a nice time to get some really honest, raw, off the cuff information from your students because they haven't just heard your message and your theme and your sermon and your inspiration and like, oh, that was just what I needed today when you read that quote from the Mary Oliver poem because they haven't been set up to say that. So you could
Mhm.
wind up getting some really useful straight up feedback about what they're doing there.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's such a good point. Or even if you interact with your students via email or list, serve, you could even ask for that stuff, before classes, between classes. Like what
Mhm.
made you come this week? What did you find valuable about the experience? Why do you come back? I think that's great. I agree that asking students for anything after class is not it's not really fair to them because when I go to a yoga class and I've made it through shavasana, I want to just stay in that little sweet bliss spot and head home. And even being asked for my opinion on the class feels like, no, just let me be. But before the class or even well after it, I think it's a great time to get feedback. And I can't see why that wouldn't apply to theming as well. Like, did my theme land? Or even, gosh, if you've got a group of students that you see with some regularity, asking something like, what theme or bit of yoga knowledge or philosophy have I talked about or mentioned that's really landed with you or really spoken to you? I think that's a great
Mhm.
question.
Yeah, and you can even give it a quick preface with a sentence like, "I want to be as helpful as possible, so I need to have feedback so I can grow." Yeah, is there
Yeah.
anything that stuck out of the lessons that we've been exploring in class in the last couple months or whatever?
Mhm.
I know you have had this experience. I had a whole episode on expressions in class, and so many teachers at our level of years teaching experience will agree. Like it is the students who have the resting bitch face and leave without talking to you after class that then reach out to you later and say, "Oh, I was so moved. That was exactly what I needed." You're like, "Really?"
Mhm.
Because you look like you weren't having any fun at all.
Well, and I think about myself in a yoga class, and if I really am there for my own experience, I may not interact as much, or I might be just a little more closed off. I'm a really friendly and extroverted person, but sometimes I don't want to show up and be friendly and extroverted because frankly, that's a type of performance a little bit, isn't it?
Mhm.
I remind my students often at the start of class, like, relax all the muscles of your face that have been giving expressions all day. You don't have to smile for me. And so, yeah, to your point, I think it's so true that, the students who perhaps look the most stoic or disinterested are the students who most desperately need the practice and your inspiration and your words and the message and the movement and the breath and the silence.
So, what's our advice to help teachers get started building their confidence and talking about philosophy and theming so that they can reach those students and give them what they need?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think the best advice that we have, and maybe we share this or maybe you'll tweak it, is definitely already in our books, Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses and Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses Volume 2. But what I would say, I'll come back to that idea, but what I would say is when you think about theming, if you think I have to theme and talk about yoga philosophy, that feels very heavy. That feels very like loaded. But
Mm,
instead, as a teacher, if you think I want to share something that has moved me, has spoken to me, I think of something like the concept of santosha, contentment, which
mm.
is, a bit of yoga philosophy that I come back to all the time personally. It speaks to me personally. I wrestle with being content. I try to center that in my life. And so when I talk about that, I'm not preaching on a theme. I'm sharing a bit of yoga philosophy that authentically connects to my lived experience. And in our books, Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses and Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses Volume 2, one of the things that I know you and I have tried to do is to take yoga philosophy and quotes and concepts, and make them something that is not just an esoteric idea, but that is written about and sort of charted in a template form so that a yoga teacher can read it, can find the bits that really speak to them, and they can weave that theme into their class. Because to me, that's how you get more confident bringing theme into your class. You find something that inspires you and feels natural for you to talk about. And our books really try to offer that up to people. Like, hey, here's a theme that we've loved that feels authentic to us. Try it on for size. Make some changes to it. See the ways that you could talk about it. See if it inspires you, and then if it does, bring it to your students.
Yeah, yeah. I love for teachers to know that they don't have to like sit with the book and read the things that we suggest they might like to say to their students. That this is all simply an offering that they can use however they see fit. Harkening back because it's so fresh in my short-term memory. In the test kitchen and the mentorship membership, I'm giving people lesson plans. It's a done for you service. Like, here is your meal kit for the month. Here is your recipe. Here are the ingredients. Here are the ways that you can season it. Here's,
Mhm.
some alternate options for your students. And they're like, so are we supposed to go and teach this like that? Like, boom, boom, boom. I was like, you could, but you don't have to. Maybe you already have some stuff that you need to eat from the fridge first before you start cracking open the meal kit. Or maybe you wind up kind of making it, but putting it in the freezer to come back to later. And
Mhm.
some of the, because I'm only guessing at a balanced lesson plan, that's going to be adaptable and useful across a variety of situations. Of course, I want you to like pull out pieces and cherry pick it. Like, if you got your blue
Yeah.
apron kit, you might, just make something and send it off to somebody who needs the food because you don't like green peppers and you were never going to eat that anyway. Or maybe
Mhm.
you're like, I'm just going to eat this dessert out of this meal kit. Like, whatever works for you in the recipe, whatever works for you in the theme template, that's how you start to make it your own. That said, it can be really useful to have a model to follow along with at the beginning. So if you're picking up these books for the first time, I know Alexandra will be with me to say, flip through and whatever catches your eye, you just kind of rifle through the pages and say, that. Start there and start practicing. Feel free to adapt our words. Feel free to quote our words wholesale. You don't even have to say, this comes from this book. Try it on, see how it feels,
Mhm.
and then start to tweak the recipe to taste, because that's how you make it authentically you, is to start from the place, because you have to have somewhere to start from. You start at the start line, but then you start to adapt it to whatever feels most resonant for you and most helpful for your students. You know your students way better than we would ever know from here
Mhm.
on this side of the screen. We're simply guessing.
Mhm. I love that. That's exactly it. And I love you always use food analogies. And when you were sharing that, I was thinking, yeah, because sometimes the way that I might theme is a bit more bacon versus yours is a bit more prosciutto. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
your voice might be elevated. Like, I'm from a small town in the South. We're bacon all the way. So I think that's like super important, is that you look at the recipe and you
Mhm.
decide, does prosciutto something that you eat, or do you want bacon, or do you want, your turkey bacon or your tofu bacon, or no bacon at all, or
Mhm.
whatever. So yeah, what a
Mhm.
great way to think about it.
Yeah. Um, I bet listeners who are familiar with the first book, which I know many people have actually come to find the podcast because they know me through the book. Um,
Yeah.
I bet they're wondering, well, why would I buy the second book? I already have the first book. Let's outline for them some of the things that make this book a completely separate creation of its own.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad. It's so exciting to talk about this book because it was just a pleasure to write it with you, Sage. It's so fun to write with you. I'm forever, I know you and I both have this experience, but forever when I read the things we've written together, I'm like, man, that's good writing. Was that me? Was that Sage? And I love that I can't tell anymore which parts are written by me and which parts were written by you, but I find myself inspired by our joint efforts together.
That's so sweet to
But
say.
what's
I'm gonna interject to say, you've got a good partner when it feels like you're doing less than half of the work.
I
Because there have
always
been
feel
times
like
when, yeah, when you and I are both like, "Boy, I'm sorry I haven't been picking up the slack." And you're like, "What? No, you've been doing it all." That's how you know that you've really got a good partnership.
that's definitely how I feel for sure. Yeah. But I love the question of what's different about teaching yoga beyond the poses volume 2, or what does it offer readers? And I would say two big things. One is that it presents 54 brand new themes. So if you're a reader listening to this podcast and you really enjoyed teaching yoga beyond the poses, teaching yoga beyond the poses volume 2 is really fantastic because it's all new themes that have been inspiring Sage and I for the past few years. And we are excited to bring you these new themes, these new ideas that will give you a refresh for your classes. And
Yeah.
then the second the second thing is a little more structural. Well, we could pause there. And I was going to say, Sage, do you have a theme that comes to mind from the new book that you're excited to talk about, or just even like a group of themes? I
Oh, there are
I'll
so
say that.
many. Yeah, what are your favorites?
Well, I was going to say we do a little more of a deep dive into some pieces of yoga philosophy and some lines from the Yoga Sutras that, beyond just the yamas and the niyamas. And I really love talking about that stuff. And we also have a whole section where we talk about like the masculine and feminine energies of Shiva and Shakti. And I think that's a really cool section on theming. So those are the ones that I'm really excited for readers to discover.
There's a whole section that we have, that's called Rebel Yogi, and for me, it felt like the hardest one to write on. It's like one of the last ones that I think both of us got into, and I
Mhm.
am not just trying to be gracious. I really think you did write most of that, but I felt like it was almost like a third rail. Like, I don't know, do I touch these ideas and these kind of social justice themes? I want to do them justice. I don't want to be reductive with it, and I'm really happy with where we landed with those. Maybe just goes to show that the things you work on the most, maybe avoiding might actually be like right where you need to be working.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think now more than ever, those themes are so important. And I think, you and I both wanted to do those themes of real service. And so we let them marinate a little longer. And I agree.
Mhm.
I'm really happy with how they turned out. And I hope our readers find a way to integrate those themes into their classes. Um, they're good. They're good stuff. And the
Yeah.
other piece that I know we're both really excited about is the updates we've made to the template. I know it's been something like 5 years between the first book and the second book. You and I've had a lot of time to think about how we theme, how we teach yoga, and you've written some really beautiful works in the in between, including your most recent book on sequencing. But I know our big shift is, just some changes we made to the template. The one that comes to mind for me is that in the first book, Teaching Yoga Beyond the Poses, the first volume, we talked about the practices you might include with the theme that we're offering. Or sorry, we suggested poses you might include with the theme that we're offering. And in the second book, in volume 2, we suggest practices because you and I have both broadened the things that we might offer in a class. We're going to offer asana and breath work, maybe chanting, maybe music, depending on the context of the class. And so we want to offer, our students the opportunity to think about all of these things they might bring into a theme.
Yeah, yeah, and we also tweak both the first and the last sections in ways that I think are really helpful. In the first one, the first book, it said something like "write a little about your theme," and now it says "write a little about your theme and make it both personal and universal," which is something you alluded to earlier in this conversation, and I think is really helpful because your students need to know you're not just introducing this kind of vague, out there, ethereal topic. It needs to hit home for you so it can hit home for them. And the more specific detail that you can put in whatever story you're telling, the it's funny, it's kind of ironic because the more specific you can get, the more universal the theme actually becomes. Because the more that your listeners, your students can put themselves in your shoes, as you describe, like
Mhm.
how it felt to have your daughter slam the door on you and put up the sign that said no blonde mommies, or how,
Right.
you know, yeah, exactly. And that's such a specific story of yours and it's in the book, but I think the more specific you get with those details, the more people are like, "Oh, I can really feel how that might have felt," and that you were both kind of laughing at it and not hurt by it, but kind of like, "Oh, that's interesting." Change is tough to process.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's a really funny story that I hope readers get to discover as they read along. Um, but it makes me think of when you think about theming and when you think about being in the seat of the yoga teacher in general, it's really about showing up and then getting out of the way. And that's sort of what the personal and the universal is. It's like, I'm here. Here's my story. Here's my experience of this bit of yoga philosophy or this theme that's resonating in my life. And then let me get out of the way so that you, the student, can find your way into this theme and can start to marinate on how this theme, is something that speaks to what's happening in your life. And that's really, I think, kind of a good way to think about that personal and universal connection. Like show up, get out of the way.
And then give them something to take away. That is what we've added at the bottom of the theme, is to give your students some kind of lanyap, some kind of like little extra something something that they can take away with them. And in some of the themes, it's pretty obvious. It's like, well, you could write out your quote on a
Yeah.
card and give it to your students. But other times it's like there could be some kind of small object that serves as a memento of the class, a little souvenir. Or my favorite one you came up with, it was like on one of the Shakti themes. And it was like, bring in your bag of nail polish and encourage everyone to paint even just a little pinky toe as a reminder of their divine goddess energy. I love that one.
I love that. I hope somebody really like jumps on that one and we get, Instagram shots of pink toenails.
Oh,
Um,
I would
yeah,
love that.
yeah, I would love that too. I think it's so important, that idea of a little takeaway, a little giveaway. When you go to a yoga class that really speaks to your soul through the movement, through the message, and then a teacher offers you, one word on a piece of paper, or a printed out poem, or a spot of nail polish on your toenail, or a pebble that they found in a river. That's something that as a student that you hold on to. I can remember tucking little quotes into the corner of my mirror that came from a yoga class. Or I'm looking up on my shelf above me of like all these little meaningful tiny pieces of rock and things that have come my way through, whatever, being with my child out in nature. But I think those little tiny mementos as reminders to be present, to
Mhm.
breathe, to be kind to yourself, to, forgive yourself and that really slow driver in the car line. Um, any memento, any takeaway from a yoga class that reminds you to do that is so important.
Yeah, it's a physical manifestation of the sense of connection, that a
Mhm,
student feels with themselves and the practice, and that the student can feel with you. And
mhm.
that's a way that we can be of service to and reach our students even when we aren't physically present one to one, is to give them lessons and then a reminder of the lesson that they can keep coming back to.
Yes, I love that.
Will you offer an affirmation for the listeners?
Well, since so much of your this first season of your podcast is about, yoga teachers growing confidence, and we're talking about theming, I think a really beautiful um, personal mantra or affirmation is, my voice is powerful. Like, your voice is powerful, and what you say to your students matters. My voice is
I
powerful.
love it. My voice is powerful and own your power. That was a
Yeah.
theme from the first book. Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, I know, Alexandra, that you will join me in making an appeal to readers to please pre order the book. We've been through this plenty of times, and we know how absolutely critical pre orders are to the book's success. So, pre order is the very best thing that y'all who are listening can do in order to elevate this book. Then, 5-star reviews are really great for books. They're also really great for podcasts. And even just a 5-star rating can go a really long way. Please tell your friends about the book. Please tag us on Instagram if you're posting pictures of the book. It has a gorgeous cover that is an echo of the cover of the first book, and we cannot wait to get it in your hands. So please let us know how you like it. We are so excited to be of service to you in this new volume.
Yeah, yeah. But I'll also say too that just, tag us on Instagram, but also I know that listeners are often, they're in group conversations about yoga, whether that's in a WhatsApp group or on Facebook or wherever. Please, please share that this book is coming out there. Let other people who love teaching yoga beyond the poses know that teaching yoga beyond the poses volume 2 is coming soon. Please. You can already find it in Amazon, and I know that there are all your local small booksellers can order it as well.
Absolutely. And I will put the link in the show notes. Alexandra, thank you so much for being here.
Always, it's just a pleasure chatting with you, whether it's in a situation like this or we're just chatting before class. It's always so great to see you, Sage.
Yay. This is Yoga Teacher Confidential. I'm Sage Roundtree, and I will see you next time.